Welcome to the Finance Lecture. What if every collapse you have ever read about as failure was in fact the precise moment a system finally permitted itself to be touched? And what if the suffering that preceded the collapse was the necessary admission price the institution had to pay before power could enter the room? Hold that question. We are going to build it slowly, because the polite version of the Red Lobster story has been told too many times and has not surfaced any of the parts that matter. The lazy version is that a restaurant chain offered too much shrimp to the wrong customer at the wrong price. That version is not false, it is just small. It is the version you tell when you want the public to laugh instead of looking at the plumbing. The public hears endless shrimp, sees a cartoon, a customer in a booth eating the margin until the company falls down, and laughs. The laugh gives ordinary people a villain they can understand. Greedy diners, bad promotion, cheap food, gone. The actual answer is mechanical, and it has names attached to it. In May 2023, the chief executive of Red Lobster at that moment, a man named Paul Kenny, made the $20 all-you-can-eat shrimp promotion a permanent everyday item on the menu, against the advice of his own internal management team. He did this, according to the sworn bankruptcy declaration of his eventual successor, Jonathan Tybus, while operating under what the court filing called the influence of Thai Union Group. Thai Union was a Bangkok-listed seafood conglomerate that, at that moment, was simultaneously the largest equity shareholder of Red Lobster and the largest single shrimp supplier to Red Lobster. Tybus alleged that in April 2023, Kenny directed Thai Union to begin producing shrimp for Red Lobster outside the chain's normal supply chain and bidding cycle in volumes that exceeded the chain's own demand projections. He further alleged that, under the cover of what was called a quality review, 2 of the chain's competing breaded shrimp suppliers were eliminated, leaving Thai Union with an exclusive deal that quietly raised the chain's input costs. He further alleged that the in-store merchandising of the endless shrimp promotion was pushed to levels atypical of the company, and that the result was supply shortages so severe that restaurants went days or weeks without certain shrimp varieties at all. That set of allegations, all of which Thai Union has called meritless, and all of which remain to be adjudicated, describes a structure economists have a name for. The structure is called a related party flow with self-dealing exposure. It is what happens when the supplier of the input is also the equity owner of the buyer. The supplier prices the input. The buyer's cost of goods sold is the supplier's revenue. The buyer's owner is the supplier. The triangulation that ordinarily holds prices honest, the existence of a buyer whose principal is the buyer's profit margin, collapses. The cost of the input begins to behave less like a market price and more like an internal transfer payment between 2 pockets of the same coat. The chain's income statement absorbs the difference. The supplier's income statement records the gain. The conflict was reportable. The mechanism was not visible to a single diner. Red Lobster lost approximately $11 million in a single quarter from this arrangement. The chain's sales for fiscal 2023 dropped by approximately $76 million. In January 2024, Thai Union announced it was exiting the position with a non-cash impairment of $530 million against an original investment of $575 million. That is the language of accounting. The translation is that the supplier-shareholder had effectively written off its entire equity position while the chain was still operating, which left Red Lobster without the capital lifeline that had been silently underwriting its weakness for the prior several years. 4 months later, on May 19, 2024, the company filed for Chapter 11 protection in the Middle District of Florida. I want to slow down on the deeper architecture because the endless shrimp story has another wound underneath it that almost no popular account names. In 2014, Darden, the parent that then owned Red Lobster, sold the chain to a private equity firm called Golden Gate Capital for approximately $2.1 billion. Within roughly 7 months of the closing, Golden Gate executed a sale-leaseback transaction on approximately 500 of the chain's restaurant properties, raising approximately $1.5 billion. The buyer of the real estate was a publicly traded real estate investment trust, whose successor entities eventually folded into Realty Income. The economics of that transaction were severe. The chain ceased owning the land its restaurant sat on. The chain became a tenant inside its own former body. The leases were written on long, fixed terms that escalated with inflation, and that no operator inside the 4 walls had any power to renegotiate without the consent of a landlord whose only economic interest was the absolute reliability of the monthly check. This is the move people in restructuring sometimes call the lease scab. The original owner cashes out by selling the land. The restaurant continues to operate inside the same buildings, serving the same biscuits with the same servers on the same streets, but the relationship between the operating company and the ground beneath it has been quietly severed. A sale-leaseback can be a useful tool. It can unlock trapped real estate value. It can fund expansion. It can buy back equity. The cost, almost no popular account names, is that it converts the optionality of ownership into the inelasticity of rent. An owner of property can defer maintenance. An owner can shutter. An owner can renegotiate. A tenant on a triple net lease with 2 decades remaining has none of those options. The rent ticks. Every weak store has to feed it. Every promotion has to outrun it. Every manager is quietly competing against a number written years earlier by people who may no longer have been anywhere near the building. When the cyclical downturn arrives, the lease is the wound that will not heal. So when the bankruptcy finally arrived, what was actually being acquired by the new owners was not the brand, not the equipment, not the shrimp inventory. The central asset being acquired was the right to renegotiate, terminate, or reject several hundred of those leases that the prior ownership stack had no leverage against. That is the trade. The bankruptcy unlocks the leases. The new owner, in this case a vehicle called RL Investor Holdings, LLC, anchored by Fortress Investment Group with co-investors TCW Private Credit and Blue Torch, inherits the operating business with the most expensive part of its skeleton suddenly negotiable. This is the part of the analysis I want you to sit with. There is a Yale anthropologist named James C. Scott, now deceased, who wrote a book in 1998 called Seeing Like a State. Scott's argument was that states, and by extension all large concentrations of capital, must transform messy social reality into legible categories before they can operate on it. They impose grid streets, standardized weights, cadastral maps, censuses, last names, tax registries. The grid is not neutral. The grid is the precondition for action. You cannot tax a population you cannot count. You cannot conscript an army from villages you cannot find. You cannot acquire a corporation whose obligations you cannot enumerate. Bankruptcy is the cadastral survey of a dying business. It compels every claim on the entity to register itself on a public docket. Lenders, landlords, vendors, employees, pension holders, tax authorities, tort plaintiffs, deferred compensation recipients, equipment financiers, gift card holders, captive insurance contracts. Each of them must come into the open and stand in a line that the bankruptcy court can see. Once they are in line, capital can negotiate. Until they are in line, capital cannot. This is why I said at the beginning that bankruptcy is not failure. Bankruptcy is the moment a company finally becomes legible enough for power to touch it. The endless shrimp was not the disease. The endless shrimp was the diagnostic dye. You inject diagnostic dye into a circulatory system, and the clogged arteries light up. The supplier conflict was already there. The lease wound was already there. The labor exhaustion was already there. The underinvestment in kitchen capital was already there. Endless shrimp simply caused all of those latent failures to express themselves at once, in a way that finally made the company readable enough for distressed capital to enter and begin the restructuring that the operating business itself had no power to perform. I want to slow down on one more piece of the choreography, because the choreography is where the abstract financial argument meets the actual wet floor. Casual dining is not a food business. It is a choreography business. The food is the visible object on the table. The actual business is how fast a table, a server, a grill, a freezer, a supplier contract, a promotion calendar, a labor schedule, and a rent payment can be made to move together without tearing each other apart. The term to know is ticket time, which is the elapsed period between an order entering the point of sale system and the food being plated for delivery. In a healthy casual dining chain, average ticket time runs around 8 to 12 minutes for appetizers and 18 to 24 minutes for entrees, with hard ceilings written into the operating manual that any general manager can recite from memory. Ticket time is the metric that converts kitchen capacity into revenue per square foot. The deeper metric is table turn, which is how many distinct guest parties a given four-top can absorb across a Saturday evening service. Healthy turn for the casual dining segment is approximately 3 turns per peak dinner shift on the four-tops. Endless shrimp does not change the ticket time per dish. It changes the velocity at which the kitchen has to repeat the same dish for the same guest. A guest who orders 3 rounds of shrimp does not pay more, but does shrink table turn from a healthy 50 minutes to a punishing 90 or 100 minutes. When table turn collapses, the dining room runs into a wall it cannot see from the host stand. The wait list grows. The bar overflows with parties not seated. The fryers run at maximum continuously. The line cooks burn out at hour 4 of an 8-hour shift, not hour 7. The server who would have made $140 in tips on 3 turns of a four-top makes $75 on the same table, holding the seat all evening. Endless shrimp does not make customers pay less. Endless shrimp makes the operating system run hot, simultaneously, in a way no normal scheduling algorithm was designed to absorb. The financial outcome is downstream of a choreography outcome no spreadsheet can model accurately, because no spreadsheet can model what a kitchen feels like at hour 4 of a shift in which the table turn assumption silently broke at 6 p.m. The software layer compounds this. Modern casual dining chains run on point-of-sale platforms, labor scheduling software, demand forecasting models, supplier ordering systems, and customer relationship platforms that, between them, are supposed to keep the choreography legible to corporate management in real time. The systems are calibrated against historical patterns. A permanent, endless shrimp promotion produces patterns the systems have never seen. The forecasting models under-provision shrimp inventory. The labor scheduling software under-provisions servers and cooks. The customer relationship platform overcounts loyalty without measuring the cost of the loyalty against gross margin. The corporate dashboards continue to look reasonable for several quarters because the systems are reporting against the old patterns. By the time the dashboards finally show the actual damage, the damage is structural and unrecoverable. The technology was not lying. The technology was reading the past. The past had changed. So when we say the company was already weakened by the time the bankruptcy arrived, what we are describing is a cascade across 4 layers that almost never appear together in a single business school case. Layer 1, the supplier-shareholder conflict of interest at Thai Union. Layer 2, the lease scab created by the 2014 sale-leaseback. Layer 3, the choreography collapse from a permanent promotion that destroyed table turn. Layer 4, the software miscalibration that hid the damage from corporate dashboards long enough for the financial wound to become unsurvivable. Each layer alone the chain could have absorbed. The 4 together produced the collapse. That cascade is the move that turns Red Lobster from a restaurant story into a much larger argument. The endless shrimp problem is the same shape as the dollar. It is the same shape as unlimited streaming, infinite scroll, all-you-can-eat content, same-day delivery, 2-day prime, bottomless refills. Buy now, pay later, zero-fee trading, free shipping, free returns, free banking, free email, free maps, free search, free social media. Every one of those phrases is endless shrimp in another costume. One side of the transaction is permitted to behave as if the supply is infinite. The other side is forced to live inside arithmetic. As long as the velocity does not exceed certain thresholds, the system holds together. Once velocity exceeds those thresholds, the finite side breaks, and the entire arrangement reveals itself as having been borrowing from somewhere all along. This is the part that gives the meme of endless shrimp its teeth. The public was not just laughing at a restaurant chain. The public was laughing at a half-formed suspicion that the entire arrangement they live inside might be running the same trick. Endless shrimp was a tutorial in the collapse of any system that prices infinity on one side and arithmetic on the other. The audience laughed because it recognized something about itself it could not yet name. The restaurant chain made the contradiction visible with seafood. The same contradiction sits underneath nearly every consumer interface Americans currently touch. That is why the joke had weight. The joke was about the audience's life as much as it was about the company. We will come back to that suspicion, because that suspicion is what the next 4 sections of this lecture are about. The counter systems that have emerged in response to it are not separate from the Red Lobster story. They are the same story told from the other side of the room. And the body that was installed at the top of the bankrupt chain, the body of a young Yoruba American named Damola Adamolekun, is not a manager. He is an answer to a question the dying system is asking about itself. The question is whether anyone can still be priced high enough by capital to make capital look like rescue rather than extraction. That is the question Section 2 is about. What if the body of a chief executive is not a body, but a financial instrument? And what if your discomfort with that sentence is itself the proof that the instrument is working exactly as it was designed to work? Now, we walk into the part of the argument that has been ring-fenced from polite economic conversation since at least the 1970s, which is the question of what bodies signal and what signals bodies underwrite. The man we are talking about is Damola Adamolekun. He was born in February 1989 in Nigeria to Yoruba parents, a neurologist father and a pharmacist mother. He spent early childhood in Zimbabwe and the Netherlands before the family arrived in Springfield, Illinois at the age of 9. He attended Wild Lake High School in Columbia, Maryland. He won the Maryland State Debate Championship. He won a speech contest worth $10,000 and used the prize money to open his first stock portfolio at 16. He went to Brown University on the strength of that profile, where he double majored in economics and political science, played on the Ivy League championship football team, and served as president of the Brown Investment Group. He went directly from Brown to Goldman Sachs as an investment banking analyst in 2011, from there to TPG Capital as a private equity associate, from there to Harvard Business School, finishing the MBA in 2017, from there to Paulson and Company, where he persuaded John Paulson to acquire a controlling stake in P.F. Chang's, was made a partner, and at the age of 31 became the first black CEO of P.F. Chang's. He took the chain from a pandemic-distressed posture to $1 billion in annual revenue. He stepped out in 2023. On August 26, 2024, Fortress Investment Group announced his appointment as CEO of RL Investor Holdings, LLC, the new ownership vehicle for Red Lobster. He was 35 years old. I want you to read that biography back to yourself slowly, because it is, on paper, the maximum cost human credential package an institution can currently purchase in $2,024. Almost every element of it is irreducible to money alone. The football was talent plus body plus years of repetition. The debate championship was voice plus argumentation plus discipline. The Brown admission was talent plus parents plus accumulated cultural capital. The Harvard MBA was track record plus letters from people whose letters mattered. The Goldman analyst seat was Brown plus the right kind of interview performance. The TPG seat was the Goldman seat plus more interview performance. The Paulson partnership was the resume plus deal flow plus a single concentrated bet, the P.F. Chang's pitch that paid off. None of those signals can be counterfeited. Each one was expensive in a different metabolic currency. Time, repetition, social network, intellectual stamina, attention discipline, the willingness to convert one's youth into one's resume. This is the part where economics gives us the vocabulary. There is a field called signaling theory. The founding paper was written in 1973 by an economist named Michael Spence, who shared the Nobel Prize in 2001 for the argument. Spence's claim was that in the presence of asymmetric information, where the buyer cannot directly observe quality and the seller cannot easily prove it, both sides will gravitate to costly signals that only high-quality types can afford to produce. Education was Spence's textbook example. Most of what you learn in a 4-year liberal arts program has limited direct application to most jobs. The signal is the cost of completing it. The completion of an expensive, slow, attention-intensive process is information about you that the employer could not have learned any cheaper way. The signal is reliable because the cost would have been prohibitive for someone without the underlying trait the signal was proxying for. Biologists have a parallel argument. The Israeli zoologist Amos Zahavi published the handicap principle in 1975. His claim was that costly ornaments in nature, such as the peacock's tail, persist precisely because they are wasteful. Only an animal with surplus fitness can afford the metabolic cost of the tail. The tail is a credible signal of fitness because it could not be faked by an animal that did not have the fitness to spare. Costly, wasteful, therefore credible. Now ask the Spence question of Damola Adamolekun. Who is willing to pay for a signal that expensive? A distressed casual dining asset coming out of Chapter 11, with a mocked brand, exhausted labor, lease wounds, allegations of supplier self-dealing against the prior management, a public that thinks of the company as a joke, and a fund complex composed of multiple lenders that have agreed to fold their loans into the equity of a new vehicle, will pay for that signal. They will pay because they need an interface human between operating chaos and financial abstraction. They need someone who can speak to a Reuters reporter at 9 a.m. about Cheddar Bay biscuits and to a senior credit committee at 4 p.m. about lease portfolio discipline, using vocabularies that do not contradict each other in either direction. They need a face whose biography will be cited as the lead paragraph by every business journalist filing the comeback story. They need credentials that absorb the doubt of the lender, the curiosity of the journalist, and the residual suspicion of the customer. They need, in Spence's terms, a signal sufficiently expensive that no faker could produce it. They need, in Zahavi's terms, a peacock's tail. A reputation receiver in this technical sense is not just a public face. A reputation receiver is a person whose credentials are functioning as a credit instrument. Other parties extend operational, narrative, and emotional credit to the institution because they have priced the credentials of the receiver. The receiver does not produce the credit. The receiver collateralizes it. In a distressed turnaround, the most valuable commodity is time. Time to renegotiate, time to reset, time to retrain, time to retest the menu, time to absorb guest skepticism, time to bury the bad press. The reputation receiver buys time because his credentials make multiple counterparties slightly less anxious to pull the ripcord. The lender waits one more quarter. The landlord agrees to defer 6 months. The supplier extends terms. The board accepts one more capital expenditure request. The journalist writes the redemption arc instead of the obituary. Each concession is a draw against the credit line the receiver's biography opens. The biography is the collateral. The body wearing the biography is the instrument. The unsettling part is that the instrument is alive. The instrument has interests of its own. The instrument has a family, an inner life, a body that ages, a reputation that can erode. The body is, in the relevant economic sense, both a person and a financial product. The product is being underwritten by capital. The person is being underwritten by everything else. The blur between the two is where modern distressed turnaround work actually happens. And then race enters, because in America, race is a bandwidth amplifier. Race does not by itself produce the signal. Race amplifies whatever signal is already encoded. A young, black Ivy, credentialed Goldman and Paulson trained operating and finance hybrid is not just one signal. He is a stacked signal in which each element multiplies the others. The blackness makes the credentials more legible to a media class that wants to write progress narratives. The Nigerian heritage activates the immigrant excellence framing. The Ivy League football activates the discipline framing. The Harvard MBA activates the seriousness framing. The Goldman seat activates the capital framing. The Paulson partnership activates the financial track record framing. The P.F. Chang's CEO seat activates the operational framing. Each element gives the media a different door into the same paragraph. The paragraph is favorable. The paragraph buys time. If you stop there, you get the dull version. The dull version says he was chosen because he is black. That is wrong. The sharper version says his blackness, his Nigerian formation, his elite American credentialing, his private equity training, his restaurant operating experience, and his highly controlled physical presentation all converge into a single unusually efficient reputation package. Each element does separate work. None of the pieces explains the whole thing alone. Now, I want to slow down on the part of the argument that gets dismissed as superficial whenever it surfaces, which is aesthetic presentation. In ordinary corporate environments, aesthetics are treated as residual. The substance is supposed to be the strategy, the financials, the operating plan. In distressed environments, aesthetics move to the front of the load-bearing structure. Because in distress, the substance is suspect. The strategy might not work. The financials are by definition broken. The operating plan is provisional. What the counterparty universe is using to extend belief is, in part, what the executive looks like when he speaks. His optical layer is unusually disciplined. The hair is close-cropped, controlled, neither flamboyant nor militant. The wardrobe is consistently fitted, dark, free of insignia, lacking any of the flourishes that would code as personal signature or generational rebellion. The cadence in interviews is measured, subclausal, almost flat. The vocabulary is bilingual in the deepest sense, slipping between operator dialect and finance dialect without translation seams. The posture is grounded but not assertive. The smile is brief, calibrated, never broad enough to seem performative and never absent long enough to seem cold. None of these choices are accidents. Each is a vector pointed at a specific kind of counterparty anxiety it is designed to diffuse. The hair, specifically, is worth pausing on. The close-cropped black male executive aesthetic in elite American corporate life solves a problem almost nobody articulates out loud. A black executive at the top of a mass American consumer institution must simultaneously project ambition without aggression, difference without disorder, youth without inexperience, modernity without rupture, and authority without threat. That is a brutally compressed bandwidth. Most aesthetic choices that fit one of those constraints violate another. Long hair codes generational, locks code political, beards code casual, tattoos code dangerous. The space of acceptable presentation narrows to a corridor only a small number of human beings can actually walk down. The corridor is wider for white executives, narrower for black ones, narrowest for the specific permutation where the executive is also young, also operating in a distressed asset, also working through private equity, and also responsible for representing a brand with deep nostalgic load in the white middle American imagination. The aesthetic discipline is not vanity, it is the cost of the corridor. Sociologists who have studied black professional formation in elite American institutions have words for this: racial code switching, stereotype threat mitigation, the burden of representation. The phrases are clinical, what they describe is exhausting. The person must, in addition to performing the actual job, perform a continuous side job of being legible as non-threatening to an institution and a public that retains old anxieties the person did not author. That side job consumes attention, energy, and identity bandwidth that white peers do not have to spend. The compensation for this expenditure is institutional access. The cost is that the access is conditional on the maintenance of the legibility. This is the third hidden mechanism. In distressed work, where the trust deficit is the binding constraint, aesthetic governance is the variable with the highest local elasticity. A small adjustment in the optical layer produces a large adjustment in the willingness of counterparties to extend belief. The reputation receiver is not chosen despite the optical layer. The reputation receiver is chosen because the optical layer can be made to do work no spreadsheet can do. The body, controlled by a person who has spent 2 decades learning to control it, becomes a piece of capital structure. Consider how this functions across the working day of a chief executive in this position. The morning briefing at 6:30 includes a call with the sponsor's operating partner, in which the language is private credit, cap structure, lender expectations, and quarterly milestones. The 8 a.m. visit to a regional restaurant requires a different posture: walking the kitchen line, speaking with the general manager, sampling the food, watching ticket times. The 10 a.m. session with the chief marketing officer requires the language of brand, nostalgia, customer segments, and promotional calendars. The noon television hit on a national business program requires composure, the right kind of optimism, and a sentence or two of news the producer can clip. The 2 p.m. meeting with the landlord representative requires the language of lease structures, capital expenditure commitments, and store-level economics. The 4 p.m. call with the head of investor relations requires the language of bondholder confidence and quiet credibility. The 6 p.m. dinner with the operating partner requires the relaxed register of a peer who has been in the deal community long enough to share unspoken assumptions. Each of these interactions deploys a different vocabulary, a different posture, and a different micro-expression repertoire. The chief executive who can move across them without seams is rare. The chief executive who can do it while also presenting as a young black man in an industry that has historically not had many people who look like him in the seat is rarer. The aesthetic discipline is the load-bearing wall that allows the daily cross-vocabulary navigation to occur without producing the small cognitive frictions that, accumulated across a quarter, become loss of counterparty confidence. That is the part that should bother you. The body and the balance sheet have merged. The corporation no longer separates the person from the price. The person is the price. The price is the person. The market clears, and once you see the move, you cannot unsee it. The hair you noticed at the press conference is now the hair you cannot unnotice. The suit is the suit. The cadence is the cadence. The shape of the corridor is now in your field of vision. You will see it in every executive press appearance from now on. You will see it in the way the camera frames the face. You will see it in the way the captions are written. You will see who is being priced, and you will see, dimly, what they are being priced for. The institution has not learned a new language. The institution has refined an old one. The refinement is the part the public is supposed to read as progress. Whether it is progress, in any deeper sense, is the question we have to leave for the audience, because the lecture cannot answer it for them. What the lecture can do is name the mechanism. The mechanism has now been named. We are going to leave it on the table and walk into the next room, which is the room where the ladder is. What if the most efficient way to ensure that elite power is never genuinely democratized is to make the staircase visible while quietly installing a private elevator beside it? And what if the demographic diversification of the top floor is the alibi that keeps the rest of the building from asking how the elevator actually works? This is the part most analyses miss. They look at a young CEO of a major restaurant brand and ask whether he climbed quickly. That is the wrong question. The actual answer is that the ladder was never the main path. Private equity built a side door, and the side door is the part that explains everything. In a traditional restaurant company, power moves through operations. You start as an assistant manager. You become a general manager. You become a district manager. You become a regional vice president. You become a brand president. After 15 to 25 years of survival, internal politics, and field execution, you may become the chief operating officer or the chief executive. That route can produce excellent operators. It also moves slowly. It filters for endurance, internal political skill, and the ability to absorb the 1,000 small indignities of store-level life. It selects, harshly, for the kind of person who can manage other people who are very tired in buildings that smell like grease, on Saturdays when the dishwasher is broken at 6:30 in the evening and the host stand has a 45-minute wait and someone is called out. That selection is real. It produces real people. Those people are valuable. They are also, increasingly, not the people who become chief executive. Private equity filters differently. It asks, who can see the whole asset? Who can price it? Who can speak to lenders? Who can sit with the board? Who understands how a single menu decision moves through EBITDA? Who can tell whether a store-level problem is a labor issue, a rent issue, a procurement issue, a traffic issue, or a capital structure issue? Who can make the investment committee feel less stupid for owning the thing? Those are not the same filters. They produce a different kind of person. The traditional ladder rewards patience. The ownership ladder rewards comprehension. The traditional ladder selects for endurance. The ownership ladder selects for fluency. The traditional ladder moves at the speed of human reputation accumulating across regions. The ownership ladder moves at the speed of capital deals being closed. The two systems run on the same companies, often inside the same buildings, with the same operating staff, but they elevate radically different people, and they do it at radically different speeds. Damola Adamolekun did not climb the operating ladder. He moved through the ownership grammar of restaurants. Goldman Sachs Investment Banking, TPG, Capital Private Equity, Paulson and Company Partner, the pitch to John Paulson to acquire P.F. Chang's, the board seat at P.F. Chang's, the chief strategy officer role at P.F. Chang's, the chief executive role at P.F. Chang's, parachuted in at 31 without ever having run a region. He had never managed a district. He had never opened a store. He had never been the general manager of a single restaurant. He had spent the equivalent decade inside the ownership layer of restaurant assets, looking at restaurants from above, learning the deal room dialect that operators almost never need to speak. When the elevator opened at the top of the building, he stepped out. Now, ask the counterfactual seriously. If a person with the same intelligence, same work ethic, same charisma, same competence, same Brown degree, same Harvard MBA had entered the food industry through a conventional operating channel, the odds of reaching the chief executive seat of a public recognition casual dining brand at age 31 would have been close to zero. Not because the industry has a prejudice against intelligence, because the industry's ladder is too long and too crowded. The path requires years of regional service under managers who are protective of their territories. The path requires demonstrating that one can survive Saturday nights. The path requires the kind of patience that, frankly, an Ivy League finance hire has never been asked to cultivate. The conventional ladder is a filter against speed. Private equity is a filter against slowness. The two filters cannot both produce the same person in the same lifetime. You have to choose your filter. He chose, with the help of his sponsors, the ownership filter. The ownership filter produced him. This is the second hidden mechanism, and it is the one that, more than any other, deserves careful naming. Power in mid-cap and large-cap American consumer businesses has shifted substantially since the late 1980s, from public equity dispersed to private sponsor concentrated. The number of publicly traded American companies has nearly halved since the mid-1990s. The capital that left public markets did not disappear. It moved into private equity, into private credit, into family offices, into sovereign wealth structures, into the institutional limited partner ecosystem that underwrites all of the above. As that capital concentrated, the people who could speak its language gained leverage over the people who could not. Operating careers continued to exist. Operating careers also continued to bottleneck below the ownership layer. The visible ceiling remained. The invisible elevator was installed beside it. When you watch a young chief executive appear on the cover of a business magazine and the article gestures vaguely to a meritocratic trajectory, what you are usually watching is someone who entered the field through the elevator and is being narrated as if he climbed the ladder. The narration is not a lie. The narration is a translation made for an audience that still believes the ladder is the path. The ladder is the path for most people in the business. The ladder is not, in the highest visibility cases, the path that produced the person at the top. This is the part that scrambles the older racial imagination. The civil rights vision of American progress imagined access to institutions. The newer private capital vision imagines something materially different. It is not access. It is delegated control. The black executive does not enter the company as a hire seeking to rise. The black executive arrives as the agent of capital that now owns the company. The symbolic charge is different. The institutional posture is different. The relationship to labor below is different. The relationship to capital above is different. The older racial narrative cannot fully metabolize this. It has not yet found the vocabulary. The newer narrative often will not name it, because naming it would require describing the cap table out loud, and the cap table has historically been hidden from popular discourse on purpose. I'm not saying this to indict anyone. I am saying it because the dynamic is real and is not yet adequately described in either the celebratory or the critical literature. The dynamic is this. A small number of people of color, almost all of them at the apex of credentialing distributions, are now arriving in operating control roles through the ownership ladder. Their success is real, their representation is real, the economic conditions of the populations they are taken to represent have not improved in the same way. The reason is that the elevator that produced the executive does not produce the population. The elevator is too small. It accommodates one or two people at a time. The fact of representation at the top can coexist with structural stagnation everywhere below, because the mechanism that produces the top is not the mechanism that would produce the bottom. Sociologists of inequality have begun to call this elite formation pluralism. A more demographically diverse upper class coexists with a less mobile lower class, because the gates that diversified the top were never gates the bottom could pass through. The system becomes more colorful at the top and less mobile in the middle simultaneously. The two facts are not in tension. They are produced by the same underlying mechanism, which is the relocation of selection power from public hierarchies to private capital networks. I want to make one more layer of the private equity argument explicit, because it does not get named in most popular coverage. The reason private equity has concentrated so aggressively in restaurant chains over the last 25 years is not that private equity loves restaurants. Private equity does not love restaurants. The food business is operationally miserable, margin thin, labor-intensive, and culturally fragile. The reason private equity concentrates in restaurant chains is that restaurant chains have a particular kind of asset stack that, when separated, can be sold to different buyers at different multiples. The brand, the operating company, the real estate, the supply contracts, the trademarks, the franchise system if there is one. Each component, in isolation, can be sold to a buyer whose risk appetite and cost of capital are different from the operating company's. The brand can be licensed, the real estate can be re-ed, the operating company can be levered, the supply contracts can be renegotiated, the franchise rights can be expanded or contracted, the trademarks can be parked in a separate intellectual property subsidiary that earns royalties from the operating company below it. The financial engineering is not, strictly speaking, value creation. The financial engineering is value redistribution. Different layers of the stack pay different multiples. The owner who can disaggregate the stack can capture the multiple arbitrage. The operating company, which is now responsible for paying rent to a separate REIT, royalties to a separate IP holding, supply prices to a separate vendor, and interest to a separate lender, absorbs the cumulative friction. When the cycle is good, the friction is absorbable. When the cycle is bad, the friction is the wound. This is the playbook. Casual dining brands have been particularly susceptible to it for three reasons. First, they have large real estate footprints in mid-density suburban markets, which makes the real estate separable and saleable to net lease REITs at attractive cap rates. Second, they have decades of brand history, which makes the brand separable and licensable. Third, they have predictable historical traffic patterns, which gives lenders enough comfort to underwrite the operating company's debt at terms private equity can use. The combination produces a target. The target is acquired. The stack is separated. The friction accumulates. When the inevitable downturn arrives, the operating company files. The owners have, by that point, already extracted most of the cash they came for through the real estate proceeds, the special dividend, the management fees, and the eventual sale of whatever brand equity remains. This is not the only playbook. There are private equity owners who run their portfolio companies for long-term operational value, who invest in capital expenditure, who hold for 15 years, who treat the operating business with care. They exist. They are not, statistically, the majority of distressed restaurant outcomes. The majority outcome is the one I just described. Red Lobster, after the 2014 Golden Gate transaction, traced very close to the majority outcome. The 2020 transfer to Thai Union added the supplier-shareholder conflict on top of the existing real estate wound. The 2024 bankruptcy was the cumulative arrival of every consequence. The geography of this matters. Casual dining chains tend to sit on inelastic real estate in regions where the operating staff cannot easily leave. A general manager in a mid-sized Midwestern city whose Red Lobster has been quietly underperforming for 5 years cannot simply relocate to a healthier chain in a different market without uprooting their family, paying moving costs, and absorbing the personal disruption that the lease wound has been silently transferring onto them. The lease cannot move, the building cannot move, the brand cannot move, the labor cannot move easily, the supplier contracts cannot move. The only thing that can move in the modern stack is capital. Capital moves at the speed of the wire transfer. Everything else moves at the speed of human lives. That asymmetry is what makes the lease wound such a precise instrument of value extraction. The asymmetry between the mobility of capital and the mobility of the people who serve under it is the structural feature that makes the playbook work. The political dimension is the part nobody wants to name, but it deserves to be named once. The elite formation pluralism we described, in which a small number of demographically diverse executives reach operating control via the ownership ladder while the rest of the labor force remains structurally stagnant, has an interesting political feature. The visible diversity at the top supplies the political argument that the system is becoming fairer. The structural stagnation in the middle supplies the political reality that the economic experience of the bottom 3 quintiles of American income has stagnated for 2 generations. Each political faction uses one of these 2 facts and ignores the other. The progressive faction celebrates the visible diversity and quietly underestimates the structural stagnation. The conservative faction emphasizes the structural stagnation and quietly resents the visible diversity. Both factions are correct about half of the picture. Neither faction is correct about the mechanism. The mechanism is the same mechanism for both halves. The elevator that diversifies the top is the same elevator that bypasses the staircase the middle is climbing. The 2 facts coexist because they are produced by a single phenomenon, which is the relocation of selection power from public hierarchies to private capital networks. As long as the political vocabulary on both sides refuses to name this mechanism, the political conversation will continue to mistake half of the picture for all of the picture, and the structural cause will continue to operate unnamed in the background. Now, I want to introduce, briefly, the body that exists as the inverse case of this analysis. Not a streamer, not a creator. A man named Luigi Nicholas Mangione, born May 6, 1998, who graduated from the University of Pennsylvania in 2020, who came from a prominent Maryland family with political connections through his cousin in the state legislature, who was, on paper, a credential package not entirely unlike Adamolekun's at an earlier stage of life. Mangione had every door the elevator would open. He chose, allegedly, on December 4th, 2024, to do the opposite. To stand on a sidewalk outside the New York Hilton Midtown at 6:45 in the morning with a 3D printed pistol and ammunition hand inscribed with 3 words from a 2010 insurance industry book by Jay Feinman, and to fire those rounds at Brian Robert Thompson, the chief executive of United Healthcare. I'm not going to dwell on the act, because the act is condemnable, and because the lecture is not the place to relitigate the prosecution. But the comparison is the point. 2 credentialed young men, same general year of birth, same elite undergraduate exposure, same set of doors. One chose the elevator. The other allegedly chose to put the gun on the doormat of the elevator and shoot the man who was about to step into it. The choice in front of a credentialed young person, in the current American distribution, is no longer just whether to climb. The choice is, increasingly, whether the system itself deserves to be climbed. We are going to leave that question on the table. It is the question that gives Section 4 its weight. The trap is that the elevator has another property the ladder does not. Because private capital can elevate you quickly, it can also isolate you quickly. You inherit the wounds, but not necessarily the choices that created them. You become responsible for leases you did not sign, supplier contracts you did not negotiate, customer expectations you did not train, labor exhaustion you did not cause, and a meme culture you did not invite. You are responsible for the entire weight of an institution you have been inside of for less than a year, and you must make 4 constituencies believe in you simultaneously. Capital must believe discipline will return. Employees must believe discipline will not mean more pain. Customers must believe discipline will not destroy the reason they came. Media must believe a story other than the bankruptcy. That 4-body problem is harder than any operating challenge most chief executives face in their entire careers, and it must be solved in the first 18 months of the role. You can see it most clearly in the endless shrimp problem. Bring it back, and you risk repeating the joke. Kill it forever, and you risk killing one of the strongest pieces of brand memory the chain has. Bring it back with controls, and you are attempting something delicate. You're trying to monetize nostalgia without letting nostalgia govern the business. You are reintroducing the language of abundance while quietly rewriting the operating rules underneath it. The customer must feel, I got the thing I came for. The operator must know, we did not let the thing destroy us this time. Restaurants live on that gap. The room says welcome. The kitchen says capacity. The menu says choice. The prep list says limits. The advertisement says value. The income statement says not too much value. Every good restaurant is a theater of controlled generosity. The previous management forgot, or was forced to forget, the controlled part. The reputation receiver has to rebuild it without making the brand feel punished. That is the trade. That is why the appointment was structurally important. That is why the spectacle around the appointment was, in the deepest sense, governance and not theater. The next 2 sections of this lecture are about what is happening on the other side of this same economic shift in the platforms where the opposite human being is being rewarded for doing the opposite thing. What if the institutions you were raised to respect have been quietly outbid for your behavior by other institutions willing to pay you to do the literal opposite of what you were taught? And what if the people who took the bid are not failures of character but accurate readings of a market that has already repriced the dignity contract you thought you were living under? Move out of the Red Lobster machine now. We are going to look at the other room. Most people have heard that Kick pays creators 95% of subscription revenue. The headline does what good headlines do. It compresses a strange piece of financial architecture into a memorable ratio. The headline by itself is meaningless. To understand what the ratio is doing, you have to know what is on the other side of the ratio, and the other side of the ratio is not the user. Kick was registered in Melbourne, Australia in November 2022, weeks after Twitch banned advertising from several large gambling sites, including Stake.com, in response to consumer protection concerns. Kick launched on December 5th, 2022. Its parent company is EasyGo Entertainment Pty Limited. EasyGo Entertainment is controlled by 2 Australian co-founders, Bijan Tehrani and Ed Craven. The same 2 co-founders are the founders of Stake.com, one of the largest crypto-denominated online casinos in the world. Tehrani holds approximately 2/3 of EasyGo. Craven holds the remaining third through his wholly owned vehicle, Ashwood Holdings. As of April 2026, the 2 co-founders have publicly stated they have personally invested approximately $1 billion of their own capital into Kick, with no external investors. $1 billion of personal capital invested by 2 private individuals into a streaming platform that has no external investors, that pays out 95% of subscription revenue to creators, and that shows no near-term path to profitability inside the streaming platform itself, is not a streaming platform investment in the ordinary sense. It is a customer acquisition channel for an adjacent business. The adjacent business is the crypto casino. The customer is the audience of the streamers who play the casino's games on the platform. The platform's economics are intentionally subsidized because the platform is a front end, not a product. The 95-5 split is not generosity. The 95-5 split is a marketing budget. The owners of the platform are also the owners of the casino whose games the platform's creators play. Every hour of viewer attention captured by a slot stream is, in effect, an impression for stake. The platform can pay out subscription revenue at unprofitable rates because the platform is not trying to capture revenue from subscriptions. The platform is trying to manufacture eyeballs that flow into the casino's funnel where the actual margin lives, in the form of player losses on crypto-denominated wagers placed on house edge games. That is the load-bearing fact that most popular coverage of Kick will not state cleanly. Now I want to introduce the human cost of that architecture, because the architecture's human cost is where the next part of the argument actually lives. In late April and early May of 2026, a former 4-division world boxing champion named Adrien Broner spent 2 weeks live on Kick alongside a streamer who goes by Deen the Great, whose legal name is Nuruddin Shahid Shabazz. Broner is 36. He earned, by reasonable accounting, approximately $30 million over his boxing career, including roughly $5 million for his 2019 fight against Manny Pacquiao. As of the writing of this lecture, his net worth has been publicly estimated at approximately $100,000. He has not fought professionally since June 2024, when he lost a unanimous decision to Blair Cobbs. He has supported, by his own account, 10 children. He has accumulated, by court record, a 2019 judgment of approximately $830,000 from a Cleveland nightclub case, a 2020 judgment of approximately $783,000 in a related matter, and a $1.25 million suit from a New York jeweler. He has, in 2025, sold individual Instagram story promotions for $350 apiece, monetizing the remaining attention of his post-prime followers at retail. On April 28th and 29th, 2026, in clips that spread across boxing media within hours, Broner was filmed on a Deen the Great stream telling the cameraman, "I don't got bread," before asking him to cover the cost of an Uber ride home with the promise, "I'll make sure you get it back." Earlier in the same stream cycle, he had told viewers, "I'm rich already, gang, and I make my own millions." A subsequent 14-hour live stream included confrontations outside Omnia nightclub at Caesar's Palace, and an exchange in which, visibly intoxicated, Broner threatened his own wife on camera. In other clips from the same period, he attempted to kiss a woman who declined, then went on an aggressive rant directed at her. The streams reportedly attracted a single viewer contribution of approximately $15,000, and the same week saw former UFC light heavyweight champion Quentin Rampage Jackson dropping in on the channel. Broner himself, in one of the broadcasts, told Deen, "Now you can make the same money from streaming that you did from boxing." That sentence is one of the most important things any deteriorating elite athlete has said about the new economy. It is also a complete description of the mechanism this section is about. The boxing economy paid Broner, at his peak, for an asset that wore out. The streaming economy pays Deen the Great in the present for an asset that does not wear out, which is Broner himself, in his deteriorated state, in front of a camera. The athlete was the asset in the first economy. The relationship to the athlete is the asset in the second. One commentator put the obvious into words, calling Broner pimped out for content. Boxing media used the same phrase. Several fighters and observers raised the question publicly of whether the cameras were helping Broner or simply turning his deterioration into 10 hours a day of broadcastable material. This is the part of the new economy that the older economy has no vocabulary for. The asset is the visible failure. The asset is the moment of public weakness. The asset is the request for $15 of Uber money on a stream where a single viewer donation that minute was worth $15,000. The asset is the contrast between "I'm rich already, gang," and "I don't got bread," said by the same man inside the same hour. The asset is the rejected kiss, the slurred speech, the threatened wife, the camera that does not turn off. The streaming personality whose channel hosts the deterioration is the broker. Deen the Great is, in the economic sense, a manager of an undervalued legacy asset, where the asset is the body and reputation of a man who used to be paid $5 million per night to fight. The manager extracts attention. The platform extracts attention. The casino, behind the platform, extracts the gambling spend of the audience the attention drew. Each layer of the stack profits. The body in the middle ages in front of an audience. The audience, in turn, has been trained to find this entertaining. We could leave that example alone if it were singular. It is not singular. It is a species. The platform pays for the kinetic body of IShowSpeed because it captures attention by externalizing emotional intensity. The platform pays for Deen the Great because it captures attention by brokering proximity to declining elite athletes. The platform pays for Aiden Ross because he produces multi-hour spectacle from inside a multi-million-dollar Miami warehouse and hosts boxing events featuring rappers, controversial provocateurs, and arm wrestlers under the title Brand Risk. The platform pays for a streamer named Clavicular because his audience is young, his content is reactive, and his presence concentrates exactly the demographic the casino behind the platform wants. The platform's monetization model is not paying for talent, it is paying for the production of attention at velocities the legacy institutions cannot match. Now I want to introduce two contrasts to clarify the mechanism. The first is a woman named Sara Saffari. She was born in 2001, raised in Kentucky to Iranian-American parents, completed her MBA at California Lutheran, and built a fitness and lifestyle content business across Instagram, TikTok, and YouTube. As of early 2026, her audience aggregates to roughly 5.5 million followers across her three primary platforms, with YouTube income estimated by external trackers in the range of $11,000 to $174,000 per month from that platform alone, before brand partnerships, supplement endorsements, her membership programs, and her podcast revenue with Bradley Martin. Her net worth has been publicly estimated at approximately $1.5 million by 24 years old. Now, ask the comparison question honestly. Take the same human being, the same intelligence, the same discipline, the same MBA, route her through the conventional professional labor market in 2026. Marketing associate, brand manager, consumer goods analyst. The legacy economy would have priced that biography at perhaps $50,000 per year, generously, with a 4-year vesting schedule on whatever modest equity she received. Direct platform monetization repriced her by a multiple that the legacy economy cannot match without years of seniority and complete loyalty. The same person, two prices. The signal is unmistakable. The second contrast is darker and more recent, and I think the lecture has to name it because the argument requires it. On May 13th, 2026, a live streamer named Dalton Levi Atherley, known online as Chud the Builder, 28 years old, from Clarksville, Tennessee, became involved in a shooting outside the Montgomery County Courthouse. He had been in court that day over an alleged $3,000 debt. He had been arrested earlier in the same week for, among other things, walking out on a $371 bill at a Nashville steakhouse. His online persona for the prior year had been built almost entirely on what media outlets described as racist rage bait, including the public use of slurs and confrontational street streams targeting black people in particular. During the courthouse altercation, he was filmed drawing a handgun from his jacket and firing multiple rounds at a black man identified as Joshua Fox. Both men survived. Atherley was charged with attempted criminal homicide, employing a firearm during a dangerous felony, aggravated assault, and reckless endangerment with a deadly weapon. His bond was set at $1.25 million. I'm not going to spend the next paragraph on the violence itself. The violence is condemnable. The legal process is ongoing, and there is nothing analytically clarifying about replaying it. What I want you to see is what happened in the 72 hours after the violence. The streamer's pre-existing GiveSendGo crowdfunding page, which he had originally established after losing employment, exceeded $150,000 in donations. His personal meme coin appreciated significantly. A subset of supporters argued that Tennessee's Stand Your Ground laws may have applied. Some local commentators celebrated him. The Democratic Party affiliate in Montgomery County described him as an individual who had sought local notoriety as a white supremacist. The legal proceeding has not ended. The economic reaction has already happened. That is the point. The argument does not require you to agree with anything about the case. The argument requires you to see the economic structure that allows a person who has just been charged with attempted homicide of a black man to raise over $150,000 in 5 days, while pre-existing meme coins associated with him appreciate, while his audience grows, while the streaming infrastructure that hosts him remains operational. The infrastructure was not built for him. The infrastructure was built to host extreme attention, and the violence concentrated attention in a way that the platform's monetization apparatus translated automatically into capital. The capital was distributed to him through the same crowdfunding rails that distribute capital to legitimate causes. The system did not discriminate. The system did what it was built to do. Now hold all of these examples together. The legacy system installs Damola Adamolekun at the top of a bankrupt American casual dining chain because it needs a body that can absorb the doubt of multiple counterparty audiences using the inherited language of restraint, credential, and aesthetic discipline. The counter system pays Sara Saffari a multiple of what the labor market would have paid her by allowing her to monetize her audience directly. The counter system pays Deen the Great by allowing him to manage the deterioration of Adrien Broner for an audience that finds the spectacle entertaining. The counter system pays Dalton Etherly, after charged violence, because the violence concentrated the attention and the rails were already built. These are not separate stories. They are the same story told from 4 different positions in the same economic structure. The legacy system rewards legibility. The counter system rewards heat. The dignity bargain has broken. Young people are being told, by the visible behavior of the system, that the slow accumulation of restraint, credentials, and institutional compatibility is no longer the only path, and may not even be the most efficient path, to the kind of compensation the older generation defined as success. The new path is to externalize. The new path is to escalate. The new path is to convert the parts of oneself that previous institutions tried to suppress into a revenue line. The path is brutal. The path is unstable. Survivorship bias on the path is severe. The mental health costs are real. The audience is fickle. The platform terms can shift. None of those caveats erase the structural fact that the market has begun to pay in publicly observable dollars for behaviors that the older institutions defined as professional failure. The market is signaling. The young are listening. The young would be stupid not to listen. That is the part Section 5 is about. Because the listening is not just an economic phenomenon. The listening is the mechanism by which the next generation is being shaped, in real time, into a different kind of person than the one the older economy was producing. And the audience for this lecture is not separate from that listening. The audience is inside it. What if you are not a person, but a policy that has been converged on the reward landscape it has been training in since birth? And what if the only meaningful freedom available to you, in any morally serious sense, is the act of looking at your own training data from outside and choosing, against the gradient, to be shaped by something else? I want to take a careful detour through reinforcement learning, because the language of reinforcement learning is now, whether anyone likes it or not, the most precise vocabulary available for describing what is happening to human behavior under the conditions Section 4 has just laid out. Reinforcement learning, in the technical sense developed by Richard Sutton and Andrew Barto over 4 decades of work culminating in their canonical textbook of 2018, is a class of algorithms in which an agent operating in an environment learns a policy. which is a function from observations to actions, by experiencing rewards and updating its policy in the direction that maximizes expected reward. The agent does not have to understand the environment. The agent has to be able to perceive a state, choose an action, observe the reward, and adjust. Over enough iterations, the agent's policy converges on whatever the reward structure pays. The reward structure is sovereign. The policy is downstream. Humans, biologically, are reinforcement learners. The neuroscience of this has been worked out in detail. Dopamine functions as the reward prediction error signal. The basal ganglia function as the update mechanism. The prefrontal cortex performs longer horizon credit assignment. We perceive states, we choose actions, we observe rewards, we adjust. The policy that emerges is, in ordinary language, our personality, our habits, our reactions, our ambitions, our self-presentation, our internal narrative about who we are. We did not mostly choose the policy by sitting down and reasoning about it. We executed actions, received rewards, and converged. Now overlay the previous 4 sections of this lecture onto that framework. What changes is not the algorithm. The algorithm is fixed. What changes is the reward landscape. For most of the 20th century, the landscape for an ambitious young American was shaped predominantly by institutions. Schools rewarded compliance, persistence, and legible cognitive performance. Employers rewarded punctuality, deference, and steady incremental contribution. Banks rewarded saving. Spouses rewarded earning. Communities rewarded showing up. The rewards were slow, lumpy, and required years of policy execution before the agent could even tell whether the policy was working. The policies that converged in response were policies of patience, restraint, and long horizon credit assignment. Those policies, executed across populations and decades, produced what historians sometimes called the institutional self. The institutional self was not a moral achievement. The institutional self was an optimized response to a particular reward landscape. The reward landscape rewarded restraint. The agents converged on restraint. The agents did so not because they were morally superior to subsequent generations, but because they were running the same algorithm on different data. The reward landscape has changed. For an ambitious young person in the 2020s, the landscape now includes platforms that pay rewards on horizons measured in days or hours, not decades. Algorithmic feedback gives instantaneous information about which actions captured attention and which did not. Audiences extend and withdraw belief at speeds the old institutions never matched. Direct monetization tools allow micro-rewards to accrue in real time. The horizon over which credit can be assigned has compressed by a factor of roughly 1,000. A policy that took 20 years to discover whether it was rewarded inside the old institutional landscape can now be evaluated by the agent in 20 days inside the platform landscape. There is a basic theoretical result that follows when you shorten the horizon over which credit is assigned and increase the variance of the reward. The policy that converges is qualitatively different. It is more reactive. It is more variance-seeking. It is more sensitive to fluctuations in the reward signal. It is less compatible with delayed gratification. It is structurally less able to wait through a long, unrewarded period to obtain a large eventual payoff. None of this is moral failure. This is the predictable behavior of any reinforcement learner placed in a high-frequency, high-variance reward environment. The old institutional self is, in the technical sense, what you would expect from low-frequency, low-variance, deferred reward training. The new platform self is what you would expect from high-frequency, high-variance, immediate reward training. Same algorithm, different landscape, different policy. This is why the moral debate about the new young generation is mostly noise. The debate proceeds as if the young have different values or different character or different work ethic. The young do not have different anything fundamental. The young are running the same biological reinforcement learner that every previous generation ran. The training data has changed, the reward landscape has changed, the policies that converged in response are downstream of that change. If you reran your own younger self on the new landscape, you would converge on similar policies. The algorithm does not care about your moral frame. The algorithm cares about the reward signal. Now bring back the 4 figures we have been tracking. Damola Adamolekun is a policy that converged in response to a landscape that paid heavy, long horizon rewards for credentialed restraint, repeated demonstrations of capital trusted performance, and the disciplined maintenance of optical legibility across many simultaneous audiences. The Sara Saffari type is a policy that converged in response to a landscape that paid heavy, short horizon rewards for direct audience cultivation, consistent self-presentation, and parasocial fluency in a domain that the legacy economy mispriced. The Deen the Great type is a policy that converged on a landscape that pays for brokering proximity to declining elite human assets and producing escalating spectacle from those brokered relationships. The Chud the Builder type is a policy that converged on a landscape that pays for racial provocation and that, after a violent escalation, pays even more, because the violence is now the attention. 4 policies, 1 algorithm, 4 different reward landscapes. The variation in the resulting humans is not moral, it is computational. The agents are doing what the landscapes are paying them to do. The hardest version of this thought, and the one I want you to sit with before the lecture ends, is that you are also a policy. The same algorithm that converged on Adamolekun and on Saffari and on Deen the Great and on Etherly is the algorithm that converged on you. You are running a function from observed states to executed actions, updated by the rewards your local environment has been handing you for as long as you have been alive. Your sense of who you are is, in significant part, the residue of that updating process. The decisions you experience as expressions of free will are, in significant part, the policy executing. The policy is not exactly you. The policy is the part of you that has been optimized against the reward landscape you were exposed to. Somewhere behind the policy, there is a remaining capacity to look at the policy from outside, notice what reward it was trained to seek, and decide whether the reward is the one you would have chosen if you had been able to author your own training. Most people do not exercise that capacity. The policy executes by default. This is the part where the lecture stops being about Red Lobster and starts being about the audience. The new economy is rearranging the reward landscape under your feet. The landscape that produced your parents, your teachers, your early authority figures, the version of yourself you remember at 20, is no longer the landscape you are actually living inside. The new landscape pays differently. Your policy, if you keep executing on autopilot, will converge to what the new landscape pays. The convergence will happen whether or not you are aware of it. The only question is whether you intervene in the convergence with whatever fragment of meta-awareness you can still bring to bear, or whether you allow the gradient to walk you wherever it walks you. Most people will walk wherever the gradient walks them. That is what reinforcement learners do when they are not interrupted. Now bring it back to Red Lobster, because the lecture began there and the deepest version of the argument has to be tested there. The task in front of Damola Adamolekun is not, in the deep sense, restaurant management. The restaurant management is the visible task. The deep task is governance of desire under conditions in which the older institutional bargain has weakened. The customers may not be gone. The problem may be that their love arrives in the wrong economic form. They love value. They love abundance. They love biscuits. They love the middle-class fantasy that a lobster tail can be casual. All of that is real. But love is not margin. The task is not to make people remember Red Lobster. They already remember. The task is to make the memory behave. A distressed consumer brand has to lie honestly. It has to preserve the emotional truth of the old promise while changing the operating facts underneath it. The customer must feel, I got the thing I came for. The operator must know, we did not let the thing destroy us this time. Restaurants live on that gap. Every good restaurant is a theater of controlled generosity. The previous management forgot, or was directed to forget, the controlled part. The new operator has to rebuild it. This is where the legacy system and the counter system meet again, because both are about desire under constraint. The restaurant guest wants abundance. The streamer audience wants escalation. The OnlyFans subscriber wants intimacy. The Kick viewer wants volatility. The creditor wants yield. The employee wants stability. The modern economy is increasingly built around monetizing the kinds of desire that institutions use to contain. The difference is that a restaurant has physical limits. A stream escalates at the speed of attention. A restaurant escalates at the speed of fryers, servers, tables, and supply contracts. That makes Red Lobster old-fashioned in the most important way. It cannot fully become digital spectacle. It has to make spectacle sit down, order, eat, tip, and leave. That may be the most difficult conversion in the entire consumer economy. The chief executive becomes the conductor of scarcity in a culture addicted to abundance. And there is something almost tragic about that, because Red Lobster's old promise was democratic luxury. Not real luxury. Democratic luxury. The idea that ordinary families could touch the aura of seafood abundance without feeling excluded. That promise mattered. It still matters. The collapse of that promise into bankruptcy is not just a corporate story. It is a story about the shrinking middle-class fantasy that value, comfort, and dignity can all sit at the same table. If the chain succeeds, Damola Adamolekun becomes the symbol of a new kind of operator. The reputation receiver who did not merely absorb heat, but converted heat into discipline. The private capital translator who made the dining room trust the balance sheet again. The black institutional figure who did not just represent progress, but operated inside the most difficult part of progress, which is power, delegated by capital, tested by labor, and judged by consumers. If the chain fails, the story becomes colder. Red Lobster will have proven that some brands are not killed by incompetence. They are killed by the gap between what the public emotionally needs them to be and what the business model can economically permit. And the corollary is darker. Some societies are not killed by external enemies. They are killed by the gap between what the public emotionally needs them to be and what the institutional model can structurally permit. The endless shrimp was the casual dining version of that gap. The Adrien Broner stream is the post-elite athlete version of that gap. The Chud the Builder fundraiser is the local violence version of that gap. The Sara Saffari direct platform repricing is the labor market version of that gap. The Damola Adamolekun appointment is the corporate credential version of that gap. 5 different bodies inhabiting 5 different positions in the same gap. The gap is real. The gap will continue to produce events. The events will continue to be priced. The bodies will continue to be selected by capital, by attention, by acts of violence, by acts of refusal, and occasionally by acts of remarkable individual discipline. And we, the audience, will continue to be the policies that the gap is training. The training will continue whether we are watching the training or not. The only intervention available at the individual level is to look at one's own policy from outside, notice the reward landscape that shaped it, ask what one would want to be shaped by instead, and execute against the gradient if necessary, against the gradient especially if necessary, because the gradient is not the same as the good. The gradient is what the system pays. The good is what you have decided is worth paying for when you are honest about the difference. This lecture has tried to ask what is on the other side of the price. The other side is the question of what a person is supposed to become when the rewards that used to produce the institutional self are no longer the rewards being paid, and the rewards being paid are paying for something else. The lecture does not have an answer. The lecture has only the diagnosis. The diagnosis is what it is. Red Lobster's chief executive is one answer. Sara Saffari is another. Deen the Great and the man whose deterioration he is managing are a third. The streamer in Tennessee is a fourth. Most of you are, right now, slowly, by inches, becoming a fifth. The fifth is the one nobody else can describe for you. The fifth is the one your training data is converging on, whether or not you have decided to ratify the convergence. That is the choice you are actually making, even when you do not think you are choosing. Choose better than the gradient. That is the only operating instruction the lecture leaves you with. The rest is information.